December 1944. The Ardennes lay buried beneath a frozen silence, wrapped in thick morning fog. German tank crews strained their ears, hearing engines somewhere beyond the trees but seeing nothing. Then one flash, a single cannon blast tore through the mist, striking with impossible precision. The Shermans were firing from beyond sight, guided by coordination instead of vision. If you care about history told truthfully, subscribe and stay with this story. The winter of 1944 in Western Europe was harsh, unforgiving, and deceptively quiet. Allied commanders believed the German army was exhausted and in retreat after months of pressure since Normandy. Many thought the war's end was approaching. Yet, beneath the veneer of collapse, Germany was preparing one final desperate counteroffensive. A massive armored strike through the dense Ardennes forest. The goal was to split the Allied lines, seize critical supply routes, and force a negotiated peace. The terrain was brutal. The Ardennes was not open tank country. It was a labyrinth of pine forests, steep ridges, narrow farm roads, and valleys shrouded in mist. For most of the year, it was difficult terrain. In winter, it was suffocating. Fog hung low, clinging to the ground like a living thing. Snow fell in thick, wet sheets. Engines froze. Steel cracked. Visibility dropped to mere meters. For tank crews, sight was life, and the fog took that away from both sides. German armored forces, especially the feared Panzer IV, Panther, and Tiger tanks, carried reputations built from earlier campaigns. Their guns were powerful, their armor thick, and their crews experienced. German tank doctrine emphasized first-shot kills, precision, and long-range superiority. In open fields or clear weather, they were unmatched. American soldiers knew this and spoke about it in hushed voices. The sight of a Panther's angular silhouette or a Tiger's massive gun was enough to trigger instinctive dread. By contrast, the American M4 Sherman had a very different reputation. It was reliable, mobile, easy to maintain, but it was not built for head-on duels. Its armor was thinner. Its 75mm gun struggled to penetrate German frontal armor at long distances. German crews believed the Sherman was weak, inferior, and poorly armored, something to outrange, overpower, and destroy before it could get close. But the Sherman had two overwhelming advantages the Germans underestimated: numbers and communication. America had something far more decisive than thicker steel. It had factories that never stopped. While Germany struggled to replace losses, America replaced tanks, trained new crews, shipped fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and food across oceans, and still had more to give. The average German tank unit entered the Ardennes offensive with fewer tanks than they requested, limited fuel, aging spare parts, and crews who were often fighting their third winter of war. Meanwhile, U.S. armored divisions were continuously resupplied, reinforced, and reorganized with fresh manpower. Then came the fog. For the Germans, the fog was a gamble, a way to hide their armored movement and strike before Allied aircraft could attack. It worked initially. The offensive achieved surprise. Allied infantry units were pushed back. Towns fell. Roads turned into battle corridors clogged with burning vehicles. But the fog did not only mask German movement. It also transformed how tanks fought. German doctrine depended heavily on visibility. Their long-range gunnery advantage meant little when they could no longer see their targets. Their optics were exceptional, but optics require sight. Their first-shot kill doctrine faltered when the first shot had no target to lock onto. American tank crews, however, relied on something else entirely: radio coordination. Every Sherman was equipped with reliable internal and external radio systems that allowed tank commanders, infantry squads, artillery observers, and even aircraft controllers to share information instantly. Sherman crews could track enemy movement by sound, scout report, and triangulated positioning. even without line of sight. This advantage grew more powerful in the fog. In a battlefield where nobody could see, the side that could communicate effectively held the real weapon. The Shermans did not need to see the German tanks. They only needed to know where they were, and fire based on direction, timing, and rehearsed coordination. The fog did not merely conceal the battlefield, it leveled it, and sometimes it tilted it. Because while German tank crews were trained to fight what they could see, American tank crews were trained to fight as part of a system. A wider network of forward observers, overlapping fields of fire, and coordinated supporting units. This is where the story turns. The battlefield was no longer about who had the thickest armor, the longest gun, or the largest tank. It became a contest of information, sound, signal, and trust between crews who could not see each other but fought as one. And in the Ardennes, this shift would soon become unmistakable. By late 1944, the United States had been at war long enough to learn, sometimes painfully, what worked and what did not on the battlefield. Early encounters with German armor in North Africa and Italy were humbling. Sherman crews saw firsthand how German guns could outrange them, and how frontal armor meant little if the enemy fired first. Losses were heavy. Crews were shaken. The lessons were immediate and urgent. But unlike Germany, the United States could change rapidly. It could study, reorganize, redesign, and retrain on a scale the Germans could no longer match. American battlefield evolution did not come from building a radically new tank. It came from developing a system of warfare built around coordination, intelligence, and overwhelming support. The U.S. Army began refining what would become its defining doctrine: combined arms warfare. Tanks, infantry, artillery, engineers, and air power working as a single synchronized machine. The Sherman was not designed to fight alone. It was a moving piece in a larger network, and that network was growing stronger with every battle. One of the most decisive changes came in the realm of communication. Where German tanks relied heavily on visual signals and command hierarchy, American tanks relied on radio networks that linked entire units together. Every Sherman had a radio. Every platoon could share sighting reports, changing enemy positions, and coordinates over the airwaves in real time. This meant that American tank crews fought with awareness, not guesswork. Even in the worst conditions, they could coordinate fire, maneuver, and support without ever needing to see each other. Meanwhile, Germany was losing its trained radio operators, its fuel reserves, and its ability to repair or replace damaged vehicles. Mechanical reliability, once a point of German pride, became a liability when tanks were forced to idle in freezing conditions or travel long forest routes without support. The U.S., on the other hand, leaned into logistical resilience. A damaged Sherman could be repaired at the roadside. A destroyed Sherman could be replaced within days. Crews could rotate, train, and return. Fuel flowed. Ammunition came by the truckload. Food, medical care, and winter supplies arrived steadily. War is not merely a contest of steel. It is a contest of endurance. In the months before the Ardennes offensive, American armored divisions began integrating a new battlefield tool: forward observers. These were trained soldiers positioned near or ahead of the front lines who watched, listened, and reported enemy movement. They carried radios, binoculars, sometimes even captured German field maps. Their voices became the eyes of entire tank battalions. When fog descended, the role of the observer became even more critical. The observers could hear engines moving in the tree line or along roads long before a tank silhouette appeared. Their job was not to see. Their job was to locate. Once they did, they transmitted direction, distance, and expected elevation. Shermans adjusted their turrets, calibrated the gun, and fired based on sound and grid reference, not visual sightlines. It was a radical shift. It was fighting in blindness. but not without aim. And the fog of the Ardennes turned this system into a decisive advantage, while German crews strained through optics, seeing little more than white mist and shadow. American crews were firing on coordinates already confirmed through networked communication. German tanks were still trying to find their enemy. The Shermans had already targeted theirs. Meanwhile, American artillery, especially the mobile, fast-firing 105mm and 155mm field guns, remained the deadliest component of the Allied arsenal. When directed by observers, artillery could box German tank columns, force them to halt, scatter, or retreat into more predictable lanes. And those lanes were exactly where Sherman platoons waited. The U.S. was not winning by chance. It was winning because it had turned warfare into a series of interlocking decisions, each one reinforced by communication. Fog, once a danger, became a shield. And behind that shield, American tanks began to strike with sudden, unseen precision. The Germans expected chaos in low visibility. Instead, they found order. Order coordinated by radio, information, and discipline. And it was in these conditions that German crews, for the first time, would feel the shock of being hunted by an enemy they could not see. Because once the fog fully settled, the forest would echo with engines, steel, and fire. And the first shots would not come from the German guns. They would come from the Shermans. Inside every Sherman tank was something far more valuable than steel: a voice. Not a single voice, but a connected chorus. From the commander standing half out of the turret, to the loader beside the breech, to the driver feeling every vibration in the tracks, every man inside a Sherman worked in spoken coordination, and outside the tank, across entire platoons and formations, radio networks linked those voices together, forming an invisible web of shared awareness. This was the American advantage the Germans consistently underestimated. German Panzer doctrine often relied on the commander performing multiple roles at once, spotting targets, directing movement, monitoring terrain, and sometimes even operating the radio himself. The burden was immense. Under fog or heavy stress, even the most experienced German crews could be overwhelmed. Their training emphasized precision. But precision depends on sight. When the fog rolled in, precision broke. The Sherman, by contrast, was a crew-operated system built for clarity under stress. Roles were strictly defined: commander, eyes, orders, threat priority. Gunner fires only when the commander says so. Loader maintains tempo, ammunition readiness. Driver maneuvers based on spoken direction, not assumption. Assistant driver, radio operator, maintains radio net, relays intelligence, tracks changing orders. No man in a Sherman guessed. No man acted without confirmation. Everything was spoken. Everything was repeated back. This mattered more in fog than in any other condition. When visibility dropped, the Germans lost their greatest strengths: long-range optics, first-shot accuracy, and battlefield overwatch. Their tanks were designed to dominate at distance, to destroy before being threatened. But the fog forced combat into a realm of close coordination and unseen detection, and the Sherman excelled in that realm. American tank commanders listened to engine rumble the way a hunter listens to footsteps. They recognized the difference between the Panther's low, heavy churn and the Tiger's deeper, slower mechanical growl. They knew the squeak of Panzer IV road wheels against frozen mud. They could estimate direction and distance from the echoes alone. Then they spoke into their radios, calmly, precisely, sometimes with only a whisper. Enemy armor, 400 meters, bearing 15 degrees, elevation slight. Across the airwaves, every nearby Sherman heard the same message. One tank crew became 10. 10 became 30. Information moved faster than sight. The Germans, lacking universal radio distribution, often had to. Signal with flags, send messengers, or rely on tank column leaders shouting commands over engine noise in fog. That was chaos. Meanwhile, Sherman platoons operated as a single organism. If one Sherman spotted movement, all Shermans reacted. And so, in the Ardennes, something remarkable happened. American tanks began firing without ever seeing their targets directly. Not blindly, never blindly, but based on shared positioning intelligence. Observer coordinates previous, German approach patterns, likely road and ridge travel routes, engine sound triangulation, artillery spotting reports. A Sherman commander might say, Panther estimated entering clearing in 15 seconds, and all guns would turn, together, toward the unseen space. The German tank would emerge and be struck the moment its outline appeared. To German crews, it felt supernatural. How could the Americans see through fog? How could they fire before contact? But the truth was not supernatural. It was systemic. It was rehearsed. It was built, refined, tested, and standardized across thousands of units. The Sherman crews did not fight as machines. They fought as communicators. The fog did not take away their vision, because their vision was never physical. Their vision was shared awareness, and this invisible network would soon reveal itself most dramatically in one defining fog-shrouded battle. The engagement that would leave German tank commanders shaken, confused, and forced to confront a truth they had never believed possible. The Sherman, when guided by coordination, could strike first. For years, German tank crews carried an unshakable confidence into battle. Their training, doctrine, and battlefield history had taught them that they were the superior armored force in Europe. Their tanks were heavier, their guns longer, their optics sharper. In clear weather, open terrain, or controlled engagements, this confidence was justified. But in the Ardennes, under thick winter fog, that confidence began to fracture. The fog did more than obscure vision. It silenced certainty. German tank commanders could no longer rely on their greatest advantages: long-range gunnery, superior optics, tactical overwatch from advantageous positions, preemptive target identification. The battlefield that unfolded was not the war they had trained for. Instead of dueling across open ground with clear lines of sight, the Germans faced an enemy who did not seem to require visibility at all. Shermans were firing before German tanks had confirmed their positions. American shells found German armor not by chance, but with eerie consistency. German crews began assuming, incorrectly, that the Americans must have been closer than they appeared. Some believed Shermans were stalking them through the fog at extremely close range. Others suspected hidden infantry with anti-tank guns. A few even reported that the Americans must have developed some form of new optical equipment capable of piercing the mist. None of these explanations were true. What the Germans were experiencing was systemic coordination, a level of tactical communication they had not anticipated and were not equipped to counter. The German army's late-war structure had become fractured. Fuel shortages forced tanks to travel in narrow columns along predictable routes. Trailered supply convoys lagged far behind. Many units were completing movement orders in near isolation, knowing they could neither call for reinforcements nor maneuver freely in the terrain. Meanwhile, American forces positioned along key approach routes received constant direction from forward observers hidden in the tree-line infantry patrols reporting engine noise, artillery spotters adjusting trajectory and range, Sherman platoons relaying tank movement patterns. This created a battlefield of knowledge, not sight. The Germans moved blind. The Americans moved informed. When German tankers tried to establish firing lines, they found themselves struck first. When they attempted to reposition, they were bracketed by artillery. When they tried to wait out the fog, American infantry infiltrated the forest around them. The fog became hostile ground. German crews described the sensation in post-war interviews. The enemy was always ahead of us. We did not know where they were until the first shot hit. The fog belonged to them. Tension grew inside the steel hulls of German tanks. Commanders strained their ears, trying to separate engine rumble from wind. Drivers held their breath as they crawled forward in first gear. Gunners kept their fingers hovering, waiting for a silhouette that never appeared until it was too late. And when a Sherman fired, the first German crew often didn't see the tank at all, only the burst of flame through the fog and the thunder of impact against armor. The battlefield rhythm shifted. It was no longer a duel. It was an ambush conducted at operational scale. Every German attack began with uncertainty. Every American response began with information. This reversal of expectation, this collapse of the German assumption of superiority, had a devastating psychological effect. Experienced Panzer veterans found themselves hesitating. This hesitation, even lasting only seconds, was fatal in close or obscured engagements. The Germans had always believed, he who fires first survives. But now, they were not firing first. Something fundamental had changed in the Ardennes, and the shock of this realization would reach its peak during one intense, fog-shrouded engagement, a clash that would prove decisively that American Shermans, when guided by coordinated intelligence, could strike faster, earlier, and with deadlier effect than the Germans believed possible. And it is there, in that battle, where the fog became a weapon. The morning the battle unfolded, the forest was silent except for the distant churn of engines. The fog was so dense that even the closest ridge disappeared into white haze. Frost clung to every branch, every steel plate, every tread imprint in the frozen mud. The temperature hovered well below freezing, the kind of cold that made metal ring like glass and breath rise in thick clouds. This part of the Ardennes held a narrow valley road, barely wide enough for two vehicles, bordered by dense pines. German armored units were pushing through, attempting to break past American defensive lines and seize a key crossroads town behind them. That road was the artery of their advance. If they controlled it, the offensive could continue. If they lost it, their momentum would collapse. The German column advancing that morning consisted of Panzerfuß, a few Panthers, and supporting half-tracks. Their orders were direct: advance through the valley, secure the high ground, and eliminate any American armor encountered. German commanders believed they were approaching under perfect conditions. The fog would blind American reconnaissance aircraft and conceal movement. But the Americans were not. Waiting in the open, they had prepared a kill zone. Earlier that night, American forward observers had concealed themselves along the tree line overlooking the valley. These were not frontline tank crews, but carefully trained soldiers equipped with radio gear. They listened. They recorded direction of travel. They marked the sound of each engine and counted the approximate number of vehicles. They whispered coordinates back to Sherman platoons positioned well beyond visual contact. The Shermans were not clustered together. They were spread out across interlocking positions, behind tree lines, hull down along slopes, hidden behind barns and stone walls along the high ground. From these positions, they had preset fire angles based on grids from the observers. No one expected to see the enemy directly. They expected to hear them first. As the German column entered the valley, the fog was so thick that tank commanders rode half-exposed from the turret, trying to catch shapes emerging from the mist. But the fog did not part. It only deepened. Inside one of the Panzerfuß, the commander tapped the loader's shoulder, signaling readiness but uncertainty. He had been fighting since North Africa. He believed in German steel. Yet, in this silence, he felt something else. The faint sense of being watched. Then, a sound. Not from the valley, from above. The first shot came from the ridge. A Sherman, invisible beyond the fog line, fired a single, perfectly placed shell that struck the lead German tank. The explosion echoed through the valley like thunder. The Panzer's hull shuddered and then went still, blocking the path. The German column halted, engines revved, orders shouted. But no one knew where the shot came from. Before panic could settle, a second shell hit the rear vehicle. The column was now trapped front and back. That was intentional. American doctrine sought to immobilize the enemy first. Not destroy, trap. A trapped force cannot maneuver. A tank that cannot maneuver becomes a bunker, silent, blind and vulnerable. With the German line confined, the Sherman platoons began their coordinated firing sequence. Radio transmissions moved like pulse beats. Target acquired. 10 degrees left, fire. Panther movement near tree line. Shell high velocity. Range reduced. Adjust 2 mils down. Confirm hit. The Shermans were not shooting at silhouettes. They were firing on pre-measured directional calls, fine-tuned by sound triangulation. The grinding growl of a Panther engine at low throttle, the sharper clatter of Panzer IV track tension, the distinct clunk of turret rotation locking the echo patterns inside the valley. Each sound had distance. Each echo had meaning. The German crews could not believe what was happening. Their optics were useless. Their spotters saw nothing. Their gunners were aiming into blank fog. Yet American shells found them with chilling accuracy. One Panther commander ordered his gunner to fire toward the ridge, guessing direction from the flash. The shell erupted into the tree line, but it hit nothing. The Sherman that fired earlier had already repositioned. Shermans did not hold static firing positions. They moved between shots, adjusting angles, staying unpredictable. This was not improvisation. This was training. Another German tank attempted to reverse, but frozen mud caused the tracks to skid. Before it could reposition, a 75mm round struck the turret ring. Exact impact point vulnerability. The turret jammed. The commander shouted orders that could not change the outcome. American artillery now joined the fight, not to destroy tanks, but to close escape routes. High explosive shells crashed into the roads ahead and behind, turning them into flaming craters. German half-tracks carrying infantry were shredded. Smoke mixed with fog until the air burned to breathe. The valley became a sealed chamber. Inside that chamber, the Shermans hunted by sound. Through the fog, American commanders issued low-voiced commands that carried the calm certainty of practiced coordination. Hold fire. Wait for engine idle. They're pivoting. Gun left 4 degrees. On my mark. Then, fire. The blast echoed across frost-dampened pines as flame and steel tore through German armor. To the German crews, the battle made no sense. They were being attacked by tanks they could not find. Their greatest battlefield strength, the ability to shoot first, was gone. The fog, which they believed would hide them, now hid their enemy instead. The valley fell silent again, save for burning fuel and the crackle of frost-melted bark. Snow drifted into craters and onto steel that was still glowing. The Germans had not been defeated by superior armor. They had been defeated by superior coordination, discipline under stress, and the ability to fight without sight. And from that day forward, survivors of the Ardennes fog battles would speak of the Shermans not as inferior tanks, but as weapons bound to a network, striking with unseen precision. The fog had chosen sides, and it chose the side that could communicate. When the fog finally lifted and the smoke cleared from the valley, the scene that remained was one of stillness and stark finality. Burned-out German armor lay motionless along the road, some half-submerged in snow, some blackened from internal detonations, others simply silent and cold, their engines frozen in their final attempts to maneuver. The American Shermans, though weather-worn and mud-covered, still held their positions along the ridgeline. Their engines idled low, their crews watched the valley below, but there was nothing left to fire upon. The battle was over, but the consequences were just beginning. This engagement did not single-handedly decide the war, but it defined something new in the minds of those who witnessed it. For the first time in the Western campaign, German tank crews confronted a battlefield where their strength was not merely matched, it was overturned. They had believed that visibility was their arena. Firepower was their edge. Precision was their advantage. Yet here, visibility meant nothing, and without it, their tactical identity fractured. Reports from German officers following the battle carried a tone rarely heard in earlier campaigns. Words like bewilderment, uncertainty, and disorientation appeared in operational debriefs. Some commanders wrote that they had been fired upon by tanks that were not present. Others claimed that the Americans had somehow positioned armor beyond natural firing range. A handful suggested that the Americans possessed new infrared or directional targeting equipment, technology, that did not yet exist. The truth was simpler and more unsettling for them. The Americans had built a system of war that functioned even when the senses failed. This psychological blow mattered. Tank warfare is not only a contest of steel, it is a contest of expectation. When a crew believes they are already outmatched, hesitation follows. And hesitation, in armored combat, is lethal. Among American units, the mood shifted as well, but in the opposite direction. For many Sherman crews, the Ardennes fog battles offered something they had not felt before: confidence. Confidence that their training mattered. Confidence that their communication drills were decisive. Confidence that their tank, long criticized for its thinner armor and smaller gun, could win, not simply endure. They learned that mobility was power. Information was ammunition. Coordination was protection. A Sherman alone could fall. But Shermans together, linked by radio and doctrine, were something else entirely: a moving shield wall of steel and shared awareness. After the engagement, American armor units doubled down on coordinated firing, rotating movement patterns, and multi-directional support. What began as adaptation became standardized practice. Platoon commanders used fog and night conditions not as obstacles, but as operational tools. They requested battlefields where visibility was limited. They learned to shape terrain and atmosphere into weapons. Meanwhile, German armored doctrine struggled to adapt. Their production capacity was failing. Fuel shortages worsened. Many of their most experienced tank crews were already gone. And even when they could field Panthers and Tigers, they could no longer rely on their traditional method of warfare. The environment, the logistics, and the momentum had shifted. The Ardennes offensive itself, intended to fracture Allied lines, lost tempo. Every day of slowed advance drained Germany's fuel reserves further, while American counteroffensives grew stronger. The psychological advantage that had once belonged to the Panzer divisions was fading. Word of what happened in the fog spread through American armor battalions. Crews shared the story not as myth, but as proof that the Sherman's strength was never in single combat. Its strength was collective. Its weapon was communication, and so the battlefield of Europe changed. It turned away from duels of armor thickness and gun caliber. It turned toward something else entirely. Who could act as one? The fog did not simply hide the Shermans. It revealed what they were capable of when fighting as part of a unified, disciplined system. And that realization would shape armored warfare long after the snow of the Ardennes melted away. In the story of armored warfare, people often focus on the machines themselves, the thickness of the armor, the caliber of the gun, the horsepower beneath the engine plate. Those details matter, but they are not what decided the fog-covered battles of the Ardennes. What happened there was a reminder of something older and more fundamental. War is won by coordination, trust, and adaptation. The German tanks were powerful. Their guns could cut through armor at long range. Their crews were experienced and disciplined. But those strengths belonged to a battlefield where the enemy could be seen. Once the fog rolled in, once sight itself disappeared into white silence, the advantages of steel and optics were reduced to almost nothing. What remained was the human element. American tank crews did not win because they had the strongest machine. They won because they had developed a system, one built on communication, shared awareness, and flexibility. Each Sherman was a single voice, but together they formed a language the battlefield could understand. Their strength did not come from one tank firing first. It came from dozens of tanks thinking together. The fog did not level the playing field. It revealed the true shape of it. It showed that information is as much a weapon as any cannon. It showed that victory belongs not to the side that sees more, but to the side that understands more. And it reminded every soldier who walked away from that forest that strength is not a matter of individual advantage. It is the ability to act as one. Matcharderdin, in the end, is a test of unity. And on that day, in that silent, frozen valley, it was the American Shermans, not the Panthers, not the Tigers, that proved what unity could do.